your first
Mm,
degree, which is in North
mm,
England, and then
mm,
Sheffield is closer to Manchester, which is a little
mm,
further down south. But
mm,
what was it like? Because you grew up in Bahrain, which is primarily Middle Eastern, and then your roots are in Orissa in India, which is in the
mm.
eastern part of India. But you probably have friends and family from all over, and then you go and you're uprooted into a completely different culture in England, which also has its various sub communities. I know the north is very different from the south, and the east and the west. So, I mean, what was it like being a third culture, uh, kid or student in these cultures? I mean, in these different environments, and do you feel like that was constantly playing on your mind as you went about thinking about, doing all these different things?
Yes, of course, definitely. Because I think when I grew up here, it wasn't that difficult, as you would know, because we're still closer. Whilst it's a completely different culture, it's also very people are very very accommodating. So you never feel like you're far away from your own country. Also, the large number of Indians and again the tolerance and the humility in general. But then when you move to say somewhere like England, it's far off, and there's a huge culture shock to sort of deal with when you
Mm,
first move. For instance, like it's simple things such as like drinking is a very normal thing in those cultures, whereas both Bahraini and Indian cultures don't exactly like embrace drinking in the way that the English do. So initially, like firstly when you go in, it's not just you who are like trying to settle in a different environment, it's also the other people trying to understand you and figure you out as well, because they have their own sort of settling to do. So I remember being a very judgmental 17-year-old because I went with certain preconceived notions about the world. And like you believe in certain things, and like when you see people doing something differently, you tend to judge them. So like over time though, it changed, the judgment changed, and I'm very happy for that because I'm a much better person now. But I think the biggest struggle was initially, and this is funny, but the accent.
mm,
Oftentimes, like I would be afraid to speak because I didn't want to pronounce something the wrong way, or I didn't want to be made fun of, or whatever it was. Because um, a lot of my very close friends who were settled in the UK, or who were like British Indians, basically, they too like didn't realize what they were doing when they were making fun of some of us. And there were a bunch of us who went from India or from Bahrain and had our own set of accents, and they would make these fleeting jokes which they obviously they didn't mean to offend us. Deep down it was just a joke, but it had such a huge impact. And you probably know, like I had like a background in public speaking. That is what I did all throughout my high school years. And I enjoyed it. It was something I was good at. But then when I moved, all of a sudden I was scared to speak. I was really, really scared to put out my opinion simply because I didn't know if people would accept the way I talked, or what I was pronouncing was correct or incorrect, or these little things that sort of get to you. And I think a funny instance is that apparently like nobody taught us how to pronounce the vowels correctly. I don't know if you had the same experience, but apparently we don't know how the difference between a v and a w, as in a v and a w. So that was something that constantly happened to me, and people would correct me all the time. And when you get corrected, it's okay. Like I was open to learning, but you're some deep down, you sort of die a little bit every time you're corrected. So the accent was a huge, huge problem. And in when I look back, and I was and during my first or second year, I was very adamant. I'm like, I'm not going to change my accent. I can change my pronunciation,
mm,
but I won't be changing my accent for this. I'm sorry, it's unnecessary. People have understood me perfectly well in the past, so I'm not going to be changing how I talk.
yeah.
But then my career happened, which was in journalism, and a lot of it was hardcore journalism, when you call up people and you ask for stories. Um, Majority of the times, people would just cut the call on me. It was a newsroom wherein people would call to give a story, to talk about something, and when they would transfer the line to me, and I would start talking, they would cut the call.
Wow.
So that's when I was truly hit by it in
Mm.
my third slash fourth year in the United Kingdom. I realized that I might have to learn the accent, and I was told that in order to make them more comfortable and for them to give you their story, you need to have a little bit of an accent
Sure.
so they feel comfortable. And so
Mm.
I actually took up elocution classes of sorts, which most of my closest friends don't know about.
Mm.
But I acquired the British accent. I
Mm.
actually learned it, how to pronounce things the British way. And that, like, it was a huge hit to my pehchan or an identity, because why do I need to have an accent for
Yeah.
people to understand me? But that's just the reality of things, and believe it or not, it made things easier in the newsroom. So I think accent and like just putting myself out there was one of the biggest struggles. Like, and I didn't, and I think it came as a shock because I didn't think that would be one of my struggles.
Wow.
I was overconfident in the way I carried myself or spoke. So it was a blow.
Wow.
But you live and learn, and everything is an experience, I guess.
Yeah, and I completely relate to that because I'm currently in Canada, and I went to school to be an English teacher, and very often I catch myself saying certain things, and it's not said in a particular way here, and then I realized that there is an unconscious hierarchy in terms of North American and British English being placed on a pedestal. And that goes back to our colonial legacy in terms of
Definitely.
how the global system is structured, right? But then if you think about it, a lot of us grew up speaking English as one of our main languages, right? And we just spoke it in a different way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is in any way different from. But then I understand where you're coming from when you say that as people that live in different cultures, we constantly have to code switch, right, between
Definitely.
one
Yeah.
identity and another identity.